Okay, so in case you guys haven't heard, Sikh Indians are planning widespread protests at the G7 summit in Alberta and in other areas across Canada this weekend. They have three demands. Listen up.
On behalf of Sikh organizations across Canada, we are making some concrete calls for action. Those three demands are, firstly, that a public inquiry into India's foreign interference and transnational oppression be held. Secondly, intelligence sharing agreements with India and any intelligence sharing should immediately be cancelled. And finally, the invitation to Narendra Modi to the G7 summit should be withdrawn unless India cooperates with Canadian law enforcement in the ongoing investigations and pledges to no longer interfere in Canada and to no longer target Sikhs in Canada.
Will Sikh organizations be protesting the arrival of Modi, his presence at the G7?
I think there's multiple sites for protests that are in and around the Kananaskis area, in Banff and Calgary. So there are planned protests that will be happening there. On Saturday here at Parliament Hill, June 14th at 12 p.m., there are buses that will be rolling in from Toronto and Montreal from the Sikh community. Other communities as well will be joining in. We're expecting anywhere in 500 to 1,000 or more people that will be on Parliament Hill for that event. That is basically in our minds an anti-Modi rally to take place. Basically to talk about what's happening there. And there, with the gathering of that many community members, there may be more further steps that we take and announce them there as we kind of move into the week of G7. So there are definitely protests that are being planned.
Buckle up, you guys. It might be a crazy weekend. But by now, you've probably heard that Mark Carney invited Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the G7 starting in just over 3 days from now. The G7 summit will be held in Kananaskis, Alberta this year. That invite has obviously triggered quite a bit of backlash from Sikh Canadians. Interestingly, POLV actually supports the Prime Minister's decision to invite Narendra Modi to the G7. Listen to what POLV says here.
India has been at the last 6 G7 conferences. It's one of the biggest and fastest growing economies in the world. We need to sell our natural gas, our civilian nuclear power technology, and other resource projects to India, and we need to work with India and other countries on trade and security. So we, as Conservatives, understand that the invitation is necessary, and that we want to see the government work on addressing security issues at the same time as when Prime Minister has those conversations with Prime Minister Modi.
Now, there are a few ways you can interpret POLV's support of this Narendra Modi invitation. If you're being logical, you take what he said at face value. It is purely economical, and Canada does need to access one of the largest economies in the world. So in that sense, it makes sense, right? Why wouldn't you normalize relations with India? Now, if you really wanted to be a conspiracy theorist, you could say that, well, didn't the inquiry into foreign interference under Justin Trudeau find that India probably influenced the last 2 conservative leadership races? So essentially, POLV was chosen by India. That's the conspiracy theory, right? So is POLV just doing the bidding of his overlords? Now, to be honest, I believe the economic explanation. It makes sense to me. But I've got to say, the Sikhs have every reason to be concerned here. Violence against Sikh Indians has been exported to Canada over the last few years. The RCMP obtained evidence linking agents of the Indian government to homicides and other acts of violence here in Canada. Now, these crimes within Canada targeted opponents of the Narendra Modi government, allegedly. People like Sikh activist Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who was shot dead in 2023 in Surrey, British Columbia. Now, obviously, the Indian government has denied everything, right? That's the way these things go. But here's what I think. I already told you how I feel about the economic gain to be had here for the whole of Canada. It makes sense to me that Mark Carney wants to normalize relations with India in some capacity. Here's the thing. Although it is not formally a part of the G7, India has been invited to the G7 since 2019. So in that sense, Mark Carney is not doing anything extraordinary here, right? He's just following what has been. At the same time, this is a ballsy move because it was always going to be criticized by certain sections of the country, but he did it anyway. He chose to be pragmatic. We're currently in a trade war with the US and China, and we've had a strained relationship with India since 2023 or so. So when you think about it, the US, China, and India are basically the three biggest economies in the world. It is not in our best interest to be fighting a trade war with all three of them at the same time. And really, if we mean to diversify our trade away from the US, we need to get in with India and China. People talk about how we should be exporting our natural gas to Asia. Well, this is part of how you get to that. This is how you get to that point, right? Mark Carney is consciously taking a different approach to Justin Trudeau here. Justin Trudeau, you might recall, expelled 6 Indian diplomats over the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Mark Carney seems to be choosing a different approach. He seems to be favoring economic gain. The other thing I will say about this is this. I have never been in favor of blaming another country for your own security problems. Trump likes to do this a lot, right? He blames the fentanyl crisis on Mexico and China and even on Canada. But when you really think about it, do you know how many systems have to fail in your own country for fentanyl precursors or finished products to come in, for fentanyl super labs to operate undetected, for fentanyl to get distributed in your streets, for money made from these drugs to get cleaned and transported to kingpins who probably live somewhere far away where you can't easily touch them? Just think about all the systems that have failed here. Do you know how many systems have to fail for this to happen in your country? That's ports, that's your border, that's local police, that's your financial institutions. So as I said, I've never been in favor of solely blaming other countries for your own problems. Here in Canada, we have to ask the same question. How are we importing violence from India into our country? Right? There's violence from other countries too. Don't get me wrong. Like, well, we're just talking about India right now. That's why I'm talking about violence from India. But here, look at this picture right here. See these three guys? These three guys are suspects in the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, the Sikh activist I told you about earlier. All of these accused men are Indian citizens and have been non-permanent residents of Canada for 3 to 5 years, according to the report. Here's something I learned from CBC's report on this particular case, actually. Now, sources told CBC News that these men arrived in Canada on temporary visas after 2021. Now, some of those temporary visas were student visas. None of them are believed to have actually pursued education while in Canada. None of them have obtained permanent residency. So there is a suspicion now that these guys may have been Indian sleeper agents operating here in Canada. So again, do you know how many systems have to fail here in Canada for a sleeper cell of people on student visas to kill a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil? Like, first of all, were they vetted properly before they were granted visas? Second of all, some of them were on student visas, and yet, according to this CBC report, they never pursued education while here in Canada. So what system do we have that prevents people from coming into Canada for bogus reasons and then proceeding to stay here illegally and commit crimes, no less? Yeah, that's a security risk, right? There are Indian gangs like the Bishnoi gang believed to be active here in Canada right now. The Bishnoi gang was actually linked to the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. So here in Canada, you're getting extortions. People are getting murdered. People are getting threatened. People are getting surveilled. Like, think about this for a sec. Jagmeet Singh, basically the highest profile Sikh in Canada, has faced these threats too. He has faced these threats as well, right? When you think about it, if they could threaten Jagmeet Singh, then no one in that community is safe. So you've got to ask that question. How many systems do you think have failed here? How have we imported violence from foreign countries into this country? And now we seemingly have to choose between economic gain and protecting Canadians. Anyways, as I said, it might be a crazy weekend rolling into next week. I fully support the Sikh Canadians' right to protest, but I will just admonish people, if you're going to protest, please keep it peaceful. Last thing we want is a Los Angeles type of situation here in Canada. What a shit show, right? Anyways, that's all I have to say about this. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe down below. I'll see you next time. Take care.